Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, guys. Welcome once again to Ektv Live with me, Khalil Muhammad. As promised, on a Monday, we talk about exceptional Muslim legends that have made a profound difference, not just to our community, to our ummah, but to the entire planet Earth as well. Today's subject is absolutely no exception when it comes to that. This man is known by the name Al-Hajj Malik El-Shabazz. Now, mums and dads out there, you may know who that is and know that he has a different name that you will probably be just about to come out your lips. He is known as Malcolm X. Malcolm X was an individual who was active in the 50s and 60s, and he was very much interested in racial harmony and showing the beauty of Islam. So today we're going to go a little bit, we can only skim the surface of a man who is so monumental after all, but we're going to skim the surface of the life of Malcolm X. After I go over his life, inshallah, we're going to have a quiz at the very end. So there's certain bits and pieces of his story that I want you to listen out very carefully, because you do stand a chance of getting some amazing prizes at the end. So are you guys sitting comfortably? Are you ready to learn about the life of today's Muslim legend, Malcolm X? I certainly hope so. Let's get into it. Right. Malcolm X, yes. He had a very, very difficult upbringing. He grew up at a time where it was very, very difficult to be a person of color. It was very difficult. There were so many problems around in the part of where he lived. He grew up in a place called Omaha, Nebraska on May the 19th, 1925, and experienced a lot of racial problems, unfortunately. In that part of the world, in America at that time, it was very difficult to buy a house, to go to work, all the things that we take for granted right now. It was very difficult to do that because of something called Jim Crow laws, which meant that people couldn't do what they wanted to do. It was quite unfortunate, and it really makes us feel fortunate about how we live today, the things that we have, and all the barakah that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us, mashallah. So it was very difficult. At a very, very early age, Malcolm, he was only little, and then he wasn't called Malcolm X, no, he was called Malcolm Little. Malcolm Little lost his father at a very, very young age. It was such a tremendous blow to him and his 7 siblings and to his mother that unfortunately the mother, she had a nervous breakdown and had to be sent to a hospital for about 26 years. And the siblings, all of his brothers and sisters, were sent to different orphanages to grow up. Just imagine that. You grew up with your family and your father passes away. And then the entire family is split apart. Just imagine how that must have been very difficult. He's not only got to face the troubles in school, the troubles in the society, but now his entire family has been broken apart. That is what happens sometimes when your family gets broken apart. The things we take for granted, quite often, they can be taken from us just like this. And yes, it is a test for a lot of us as well. And we're going to see, how did Malcolm Little at the time, how did he progress with that kind of problem as well, inshallah. Let's go scroll up a little bit there, you know what I mean? Right, so that sudden loss, as I said, meant that the emotional and the psychological difficulties were immense. But it didn't mean that Malcolm had given up. In fact, he still wanted to do well. And even though he was in school, and he was apart from his family, the family was broken apart, he still excelled in school. He didn't allow the problems in his life to stop him from still achieving in school, to the point where he even became a school president. Can you believe that? He became the president of the school. They kind of voted him in for that as well, and he did very, very well, mashallah. After leaving school, Malcolm decided to leave and go to a city called Boston, where his half-sister Ella lived. Now, this is where more trials and tribulations came into the life of Malcolm X, because with no father figure, no mother figure, only his half-sister there, he was allowed to run rampant. He was allowed to go crazy, basically. And remember, he's coming from a small city, a small town in Michigan, and he's now gone to the big city with the big lights and everything happening as well. Unfortunately, he got sunk more and more and more into a life of crime. It could happen to anybody. After having all those difficulties, it makes sense that he's going to look for something to kind of make him feel a bit better. So unfortunately, that's what happened. He got into a life of crime. Now, Malcolm X, or Malcolm Little at the time, he had naturally red hair. I don't mean red like this, but he had like a ginger. He was a bit of a ginger, right? He had ginger hair. And on the streets, his street name was Detroit Red because of his red hair. Now, the life that Malcolm was living, it was really incredible. Crime and drugs and all manner of evil things he was getting involved in. It was just going to be a matter of time before Malcolm was going to be landed in prison. And that is exactly what happened. He was doing some burglary, and unfortunately, or is it fortunately? Allah knows he knows what he's doing. Fortunately, I'm going to say, Malcolm got arrested and he was sentenced to 10 years in prison. Yes. In fact, the judge gave him 10 years, 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 10 years. So he gave him 10 years like 13 times. And he was thinking, oh my gosh, that means like 100 years. But no, we're going to do all 10 years at the same time, okay? So that's what happened. He was sent to prison. Now you can imagine a rebellious young man who's had a bit of a sketchy past, is now in prison, and that is where he met some individuals who said to him, you know, you've obviously got a very keen mind, Malcolm, and you definitely should use your mind for something else as opposed to just criminality. So Malcolm took it upon himself to actually, check this out, he actually got a dictionary and started writing out all of the words with their meanings, from aardvark all the way down. I'm not sure what the Z was, but he wrote out all the words. That way he was beginning to learn words, their meaning, their derivation, their etymology, and all of that good stuff as well. He began to feed his mind despite the fact that he was in such a terrible location. Also in prison, he used to argue with people all the time, and he had a very horrible temper, to the point they gave him another nickname. That another nickname was Satan. They called him Satan. That was his nickname because he argued so much with the prison guards, with his fellow inmates, and the people that were teaching him different things. So, in there for 10 years. But what happened next was about to change his life entirely. Now, one of his brothers, called Reginald, had joined a group calling themselves, and I'm going to give you the full title of this group, the Lost Found Nation of Islam. They were called the Lost Found Nation of Islam, or Islam for short. And his brother Reginald had joined this particular group. And he was convinced that this group had the teachings that could liberate Malcolm from prison. And he wrote him a letter and he told Malcolm this. Obviously, Malcolm's got to be so curious. Wow, I can get out of prison? How is that going to happen? So his brother said, first and foremost, you need to stop drinking alcohol. You need to stop eating pork. He was thinking, well, okay, how is this going to get me out of prison? Obviously, he's thinking, well, you know, I don't see how that's connected to me getting out of prison. But he said the teachings of our leader, a man called Elijah Muhammad, his teachings will allow you to free your mind from the shackles of the world, from the dunya, so to speak, and that will then free your body, meaning that you'll begin to be cleaner, you'll eat well, you'll be a better person, you'll be more considerate for other people's feelings, and things of that nature. Malcolm decided to begin to practice the teachings of this group. It was a different group, it was a deviant group called the Nation of Islam, and he began to practice what their leader was teaching. Right. So for a long time, Malcolm began to practice this part of what they call the Nation of Islam. Now, here's a very important part. Malcolm was called Malcolm Little. As he joined the Nation of Islam, he got rid of the word little and called himself X. Now, this is something a lot of people don't understand. Why does he call himself Malcolm X? You see, the members of the Nation of Islam, as soon as you joined, you'd get rid of your last name and you would put an X there. This is the reason why. The people in America, the black people in America, were taken from Africa, and they were taken as slaves to America and the New World. There, they were stripped of their names, stripped of their language, stripped of their religion, and given a different name, a European name. So they didn't actually know what their African name was. So Elijah Muhammad said, until they learn about themselves, they have to take the X. Now, the X in mathematics represents the unknown. You should know that in maths anyway. X represents the unknown. So because it's unknown, we just going to put an X there for now. So he became Malcolm X. Do you understand that? He became Malcolm X. He was no longer Malcolm Little. Soon after, Malcolm X now, I suppose, Malcolm X left prison and joined the Nation of Islam full time. Now, he was fired up by the teachings of Elijah Muhammad and decided to help out, as you would do. He helped out to the point where there were only 400 members of the Nation of Islam. By the time Malcolm started to speak in this town and this city and this city and that city, there were 40,000 members of the Nation of Islam. 40,000 members of the Nation of Islam just because of the efforts of Malcolm X. He also decided, in order to spread the teachings of Elijah Muhammad, he started a newspaper called Muhammad Speaks. So for a good while now, Malcolm X, he was teaching, he was preaching, and of course, he became the national spokesman for the Nation of Islam, or the NOI, as they were known for short, for a long time. But he didn't know that the other members of the Nation of Islam began to become very jealous of him. Oh, yeah, they didn't like the fact that he'd almost come from nowhere, and all of a sudden, he's become the spokesman for the Nation of Islam. And that would have repercussions later on. In 1963, the very, very, very famous president at the time, JFK, John F. Kennedy, was assassinated. And Elijah Muhammad told all of his ministers, including Malcolm, not to say anything bad about the assassination because people in America absolutely loved JFK. So, of course, Malcolm said, okay, we're not going to say anything. Unfortunately, as Malcolm was leaving a TV station one day, a reporter cornered him and said, look, what do you make of the assassination of John F. Kennedy? Malcolm tried to avoid the question, but the reporter kept pushing him to the point where Malcolm finally said that the assassination of JFK was a case of chickens coming home to roost. And that was the last thing he should have said. Now, what does that phrase mean? Chickens coming home to roost. It meant the things that America did around the world had now come back to visit them and take their favorite son in the form of JFK. Elijah Muhammad heard about this and was furious with Malcolm. He said specifically, do not say anything negative about the assassination of JFK. So he called him to the office and he said, what you said was very unfortunate. America loves this man. You're going to make us, as the Nation of Islam members, look very bad. I'm going to silence you for 90 days, meaning you can't do any public speaking, you can't go on television, you can't go on the radio, you must remain silent for 90 days. Malcolm X agreed and he said, I submit to your order 100%. Unfortunately, remember those people I said were very jealous about Malcolm? They started to sort of stir a bit of trouble. They were troublemakers. And they started spreading the rumor that Malcolm had rebelled against Elijah Muhammad, and he hadn't submitted to Elijah Muhammad's commands. Ew, that was quite unfortunate because it was a lie. Something else happened. The hatred for Malcolm amongst the Nation of Islam members began to grow because of this rumor, to the point where his house was even firebombed. Somebody took a Molotov cocktail and they threw it and nearly destroyed his house and nearly damaged the skin and the flesh, damaged the skin and the flesh of his children, inshallah. It didn't, alhamdulillah, it didn't happen. But this convinced Malcolm that those people that attacked his house would not have done so unless they had express permission from Elijah Muhammad. Malcolm was gutted, to say the least. This organization that he'd been with, 12 years or so, that he'd helped to build, was now against him and was even threatening his life. He felt so let down that he decided, I've got to leave. I've got to leave the Nation of Islam. And he did so. And one of the people that encouraged him to leave was Elijah Muhammad's son, a man called Warith Deen Muhammad. He said, Malcolm, you know what? You need to go into the Muslim world and see the true practice of Islam. And using money that he got from his half-sister Ella, Malcolm went to the Middle East, he went to Africa, and one of the beautiful things is as well, he actually made Hajj. He made Hajj, and in Hajj, Malcolm saw blacks and whites, Chinese, and all different types of people sitting together, eating together in a beautiful brotherhood. It was an eye-opener for a man of this, where he was coming from, his background, to see so many different people, different races, different cultures, all equal, all eating together, all praying together. It was an amazing eye-opener for him. So when Malcolm came back to America, he was filled with a new vision, with a new outlook on how to solve the race problem in America. To this end, he started two organizations. One was called the Muslim Mosque Incorporated, and one was called the Unity of African American. The Unity of African American. That is what Malcolm did. So that is what happened. However, the hatred that had built up for Malcolm after all this time had not died down. The Nation of Islam members were still after him, to the point they were calling him, they were threatening him, threatening his family, and threatening the people around him as well. It was a very, very difficult time for Malcolm and his family. But that didn't stop Malcolm from traveling all over the world. He went to Ghana, he went to different parts of Africa, he went to the Middle East, he went to China, he went all over the world, spreading his new discovery of peace and harmony that only Islam can imbibe and create in the world. He said expressly that the race problem can be solved by the teachings of Islam. Absolutely beautiful. But as I said, even though Malcolm had a change of heart, the hatred for him was still there. However, in 1965, 21st of February, Malcolm X was about to address one of his meetings and unfortunately was assassinated by two individuals who they say were members of the Nation of Islam. It was a very, very tragic, uninspiring event that happened, that Malcolm had lost his life, and he was only 39 years of age. This is what happens sometimes when you decide to be a freedom fighter and to call people to the truth. The Nation of Islam members were sentenced for many, many years, and even now people doubt whether they were actually involved. The legacy of Malcolm X is profound, and it can be, as I said, we're just skimming the surface of Malcolm's life. And if you want to look a bit further, do a bit more research, I do encourage you to get the book, The Autobiography of Malcolm X, co-written by Arthur Haley, the man who wrote Roots. If you've ever seen Roots, the TV series, Arthur Haley is the man that actually co-wrote that book, The Autobiography of Malcolm X. I do encourage you guys to get it. So let's have a quick recap of what we've learned today about the life of Malcolm X. He was born Malcolm Little on the 19th of May 1925. His father was a political activist, and because his father had lost his life, his whole family was separated, meaning that his brothers and sisters were put in separate foster homes, and because his mother had a nervous breakdown, unfortunately, she was sent to hospital for a very, very long time. Malcolm, however, still wanted to be a lawyer. He still thought that he wanted to be ambitious and that he had so much potential and there was so much he could do in the world that he wanted to be a lawyer. As he grew older, he decided to leave where he grew up and go to Boston, where he moved in with his half-sister Ella. Unfortunately, he fell into a life of crime, and he got the name Detroit Red, which is like his street name. You know how people leave street names. He was called Detroit Red. Unfortunately, that life of crime is bound to end up in tragedy, and he was soon caught and sentenced to 10 years in prison. There, he was encouraged by his brother Reginald to join the Nation of Islam, started by a man called Elijah Muhammad. This group was called the Lost Found Nation of Islam. And there in prison, he took away the name Little and adopted the name Malcolm X, like this. Right? It took the X, which means the unknown. Now, one of these are going to be the questions later on. Anyway, he became known as Malcolm X. As he joined the Nation of Islam, During that time, there was assassination of JFK, and Elijah Muhammad told all of his ministers, including Malcolm, do not say anything bad about it. He did, and unfortunately, it was silenced to 90 days, inshallah. Right, so that's what happened. So after all of that problem and the jealousy in the Nation of Islam, he felt, well, he didn't have to, he felt he had to leave because everything he had worked for had been betrayed, and he decided to leave the Nation of Islam. He traveled to the Middle East, and there in Hajj, he discovered the true teachings of Islam, mashallah. Pretty soon after he came back, he was assassinated by 3 men. Guys, I'm going to run off some questions for you now. So I encourage you guys, you see that number here as well? You guys need to give that number a call right now, and we want to speak to you. I've got some questions for you. Do we have time to do the questions? How much time do we have? Okay, we're gonna do a couple questions, and we're going to see if you can answer those. Okay, we haven't got any callers, but guys, as I said, we're going to go over those. When we get back from the break, I'll give you some of the questions now, then you can call in with the answers. What was Malcolm's birth name? Okay, you can write the answers down and call in afterwards. What was Malcolm's street name? What does X stand for? What does the X stand for? Right, before he left school, what did he want to become? Or after he left school, what did he want to become? How long was Malcolm in prison for? What group did Malcolm join while he was in prison? I nearly said the answer there. Who was the leader of that particular group? Where did Malcolm travel to? And how many groups did Malcolm start? I'm going to do those questions again. If you've got the answers, you can call in and you can give them to me. We'll see if they're right. Okay, I'm going to quickly. Right. What was Malcolm's birth name? What was Malcolm's street name? So many names. What does X represent in Malcolm X? What career did Malcolm want to follow after he left school? How long was Malcolm sent to prison for? What group did he join? What was the name of the group? Who was the leader of the group? Where did Malcolm travel to? And how many groups did he start when he came back? Right, guys, get on those phones. Call them right now. We'll put you on the hold, inshallah, because we've got prizes just waiting for you guys and gals out there as well. So give us a call now. We'll put you on hold. When we get back from the break, I'm going to repeat those questions. We're going to see how many of them you can get right, and we'll go to the grid of prizes if you're good enough to get those correct, Amundo. Right, guys, so we're going to go for a quick break. As I said, we're going to be joining Malcolm X on Wednesday, inshallah. So make sure you get your pencils and pads and what have you ready for Wednesday, 4:15 here on Eman Channel. Okay, guys, as I said, we're going to go for a quick break. When we get back, I want to hear every one of those questions answered correctly. Can you do that? Of course you can. We'll see when we get back from the break, inshallah. Hey, assalamu alaikum, guys. Welcome back. You know what? Unfortunately, we seem to be having some technical problems at the moment, so we can't take your calls. And those answers to those questions, I'm going to leave them until Wednesday, inshallah. So you've got plenty of time to do a bit of research and check it out. But as I said before, the life of Malcolm X, you know, talk about a man who was 38, 39 when he passed away. So that's a lot of history there as well. I do encourage you, especially you young'uns out there, to see how this individual came from such a small existence, life of crime, in racism, family destroyed. All of these things happened to him, but he still decided to cultivate his mind and became one of the greatest civil rights leaders of all time. His life stands to the testimony and the power of Islam to transform lives and to give people not just purpose, but to make them great, inshallah. And in this case, he was a legend. Guys, I look forward to seeing you guys on Wednesday, inshallah. Until then, take care. Assalamu alaikum. Eman TV.